next session, which will be chaired by Indra Iyer, who is a research professor here at GW at IIEP. And she has, her bio is available to you all, and she will ably take us through this session. It's not on.
Yeah, it is. Just say it closer.
Yeah. So please settle down. Indra Iyer is going to chair this session. We have Karthik Muralidharan from UC San Diego, and he will be coming online. He is online. And Shekhar Shah will be the discussant. But Indra will introduce both of them. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Ajay, and this very interesting India conference that we are having. So good afternoon to all of you and welcome to what promises to be a very interesting session that is going to focus on what will it take for India to actually reach to be a developed economy in 2047. So our session, though it is a bit late in the afternoon, I promise you will keep you alert because we have Karthik Muralidharan talking about his fascinating insights from his book, which is called Accelerating India's Development, a magnum opus. This is his book. Please keep your tabs ready. You will need several of them. It is a very interesting read. In this book, primarily Karthik focuses on the critical role of state governments and the enabling role towards taking India to being a Viksit Bharat. To put this journey in context, let's go see where we are today and where we are to be in 2047. If you look from 2000 to 2023, India's GDP grew fourfold. Its per capita income increased threefold. India's share in the global economy increased from 1.6% to 3.4%, almost doubled because it was growing just faster than the rest of the world. And simultaneously, there were a lot of initiatives and significant strides in development outcomes. Poverty reduced, you had infrastructure, you had education, you had health, you had outreach, better digitalization made better access to services, particularly by women, and there were better delivery of even social services. But to maintain this momentum and actually accelerate towards 2047, Karthik has actually articulated the roadmap really well. And we will hear from Karthik very shortly, but what makes his book very interesting is he is not talking about what needs to be done, actually. Karthik's book talks how do we reach this, given what we have, where we are today. And in that, if you look at India's different sectors in the economy as being part of a pie, and while the pie will have a trend rate of growth naturally, what Karthik is saying is the gray areas in this pie and the holes in this pie that we need to fill up and color the gray areas, make delivery and state capacity more efficient. That in itself will help take us to propel us towards 2047. So it's a different take. So though India is a federal economy, Karthik argues that it is the onus is on the state governments to sort of take the mantle and propel us towards growth. I'll leave it to Karthik to talk further about his book, but it's based on empirical research, Karthik's deep understanding of both politics and bureaucracy. And though it is 1,000 pages long, it is very readable It's a state-led roadmap for effective governance. And, I've got anecdote from, my friends in both academia and bureaucracy that they have read this book. And that is a big testament to, how good that, how his insights have been received. As a brief introduction, Karthik, Karthik is a Tata Chancellor Professor at the University of California, San Diego. And he's also the co-founder and scientific director at the Center for Effective Governance. Karthik's research focuses on education, health, welfare, and improving public service delivery. He's also engaged actively in policy advising at both the central and state government levels. We are also very delighted to have Shekhar Shah join us in this discussion. Shekhar is a non-resident fellow at the Center for Global Development in DC. He was a former Director General of the NCR, National Council of Applied Economic Research in Delhi, and he will be providing comments. Karthik will be joining us virtually, as you can see. Very excited to have him here. He will be talking for 25 minutes and take us through till 4:30. Shekhar will provide about 10 minutes of comments, and then we will really look forward to discussions after that. So with that, I'll let Karthik open this discussion. Over to you, Karthik.
Like we all know, right, there's a lot to be proud of in terms of how India is doing. We are still one of the fastest growing large economies in the world. The macro stability is, things many other countries would envy. The size, the demographics, the democracy, the diaspora that we'll hear about in the next session. So these are all like huge assets for India. But at the same time, we also face profound challenges, especially on basic service delivery, education, health, public safety, justice, welfare, and crucially jobs. So getting India to full potential is just critically constrained by weak state effectiveness in delivering these essential public goods and services. And that's really the motivation for the book. And so again, as you know, the economy is bipolar, the Indian state is also bipolar, right? So the Indian state does incredibly well in mission mode, as Devesh, who's there, has kind of observed, on several occasions, but much less well in regular mode when you have to kind of do the day-to-day functioning of the state. Now, there have been significant improvements in some areas in the last decade, especially in DBT, where you have managed to use technology to jump over the layers of the state and get straight to the end beneficiary. But that strategy will not work when it comes to human intermediated daily delivery of frontline services. So the education, the health, the police, the courts, these are all, the technology can augment the productivity of the human, but you're not going to be able to bypass the human. So one sense of how important this is, so here's Rakesh Mohan reviewing 25 years of Indian economic reforms, where he says the way forward for accelerated growth is being held back by major governance deficits in all areas connected with the delivery of public goods and services. Lant Pritchett is always more provocative and famously said, the weak performance of the Indian state is one of the 10 greatest challenges facing humanity. And I think that reflects both the scale of the number of people affected as well as the sheer intractability of the problem. Okay. And so as we assess India at 75, there's, and we are in the 75th year of being a republic, so that analogy still works. There is really no greater barrier to India achieving full potential for citizens than improving the effectiveness of the Indian state. And a key point is that most of our discourse focuses on the national government, but almost all of these actions are constitutionally with the state government, right? So education, health, police, these are all state government functions. And we really need to be paying a lot more attention to what should be happening at the state level. Now, the normal approach to saying how do you improve public services is to advocate for more spending. Okay, so every sectoral advocate, is kind of arguing for more money. Education wallahs want 6%, health wants 3%, police wants more money, defense wants more money. But there are two fundamental challenges with this view. Right? The first is fiscal, which is we don't have the money. Okay, so there's a much lower tax to GDP ratio of about 18%, and we're already spending about 26%, and so that about roughly 8% of GDP is borrowing. Okay, so which means there's just no fiscal space to just spend your way out to better services. But the more important thing, and the reason for writing this book, is that a key finding from like 20 years of empirical research in the social sector is that the translation of default patterns of spending into outcomes is really weak. Okay, so the intellectual reason for writing this book is across 20 years of my work, you see that this trend that emerges across sectors is that the social return on investment to investing in governance and state effectiveness is often 10 times greater than simply spending money in a government as usual way. Okay, and so and I could spend like an entire, several hours, because each of these bullet points are based on, peer-reviewed papers published in top journals, each reflecting 5, 8, 10 years of work, right? But if you just look at this sector after sector after sector, like in education, where does most of our money go? It goes to unconditional pay increases of existing teachers. And multiple studies, including a QJE paper, show that, even unconditional large increases of pay have absolutely no impact on outcomes. In contrast, even a modest amount of pay that is linked to any measure of performance ends up having a huge positive impact. Moving to NREGA, what we show in that AER paper is that how investing in the biometric smart cards led to about a 10x reduction in corruption and leakage relative to the cost of the program. And then what's really stunning in this recent Econometrica paper is when we go look at the wage effects of NREGA, which is one of the main goals of NREGA, is to improve kind of market wages for the poor by having the government be an outside option. So this absolutely mind-boggling result was that improving implementation had a bigger impact on the market wages than rolling out the program itself. Okay, so let me just repeat that. Think about how much more attention we spend on crafting policies and getting budgets for announcing major programs relative to then how much less time is spent on the unglamorous issue of improving implementation. And what we find is that improving implementation had actually a bigger effect than even rolling out the program itself. Okay. So multiple other examples in education. So we have in education technology, we have, this AER paper showing how personalized educational technology that's able to cater to the variation in student learning was incredibly effective. So, so the research is highly cited, influential. It was on the front page of The Economist. But the bad news is if you then go look at the government budgets and where the money goes, like literally 99% or more of the ed tech budget essentially goes to hardware procurement. And study after study will show that the hardware by itself has no impact. Okay. So in farmer welfare, we had this project in Telangana where we just had an outbound call center that was making calls to farmers and measuring, did you in fact get your benefits? And the intervention was just creating kind of summary statistics at the block level. And we randomly told 25% of the Mandal agricultural officers that your performance is being monitored just by kind of talking to the end beneficiary. And that led to like a 25x increase in money delivered and a 100x increase in money kind of reaching on time, right? So these really inexpensive, scalable attempts to do performance measurement and management in the public sector can have like orders of magnitude higher return than simply spending more money in kind of a government as usual way. Okay. Child development, we have this recent paper in the JPE where we find that putting an extra, sometimes it's about augmenting staffing, right? Where we find that putting an extra worker in the ICDS led to a dramatic improvement in learning outcomes and a reduction in malnutrition. But where does our money go? All the money goes again to unconditional salary increases of existing workers, and that has exactly zero impact on outcomes, right? And then this recent paper by Manaswini Rao in the judiciary showing how every extra district court judge manages to clear another 200 cases a year. But because over 60, 70% of these cases are land and credit, which are factors of production being locked from being productively used, that essentially that leads to an increase in total economic activity that's that's about 30 times the cost of the judge. Okay, so the point with each of these studies, the reason for writing this book is in a way we're coming back to the state capacity literature, but now with much better micro-founded evidence. And we can talk more in Q&A about the global relevance, of this argument. So the reason, therefore, saying this is the free lunch. Okay, so if you want to accelerate development, 99% of our discourse is still on what should the government do? Where should we prioritize? Which sectors? More in education, more in health, more on PLIs. So it's all about what should the government do, and remarkably little on how should it do it, and can it even do it? Okay, and but before I get into the technocratic core of the book, which is building an effective state, I spend these 2 chapters situating the Indian development story with kind of the incentives and constraints of the two key actors of the state. And I cut this out in the interest of time, but the key point, which is something that Arvind, Devesh, and others have also made, is that India is kind of this unique outlier in kind of being an early democracy before development. And so one of the puzzles people keep wondering is, why does India not deliver more for its citizens despite being a democracy? And the answer is quite simple, right? The answer is that the early democracy has expanded citizens' abilities to make a claim on the state, but before the state itself has the capacity to meet those claims. Okay. And so the fundamental kind of the dichotomy of Indian democracy is the glass half full is we've empowered the most marginalized to make a claim on the state. The glass half empty is that because the claims exceed the capacity, you end up kind of with an overstretched, overwhelmed state that is kind of further weakened by being stretched too thin. Okay. So obviously this is going to require a combination of reducing the scope and kind of getting the state to focus on what it should be doing and improving its strength in doing what it should be doing. Okay. So I'm going to jump then to really like what the core of the book is, because the intellectual contribution of the book is not to say we need state capacity. That's kind of well known, right? The question is really doing again what Devesh Kapoor has asked economists to do, and I've been happy to respond to the call of saying that we need to look at the state as an organization and not just as an institution. So when you look at the state as an institution, you're focusing on what it does. When you look at it as an organization, you're opening up the black box to see how does this function inside that black box, right? And so the 6 key chapters here, and each of this, there's a ton of high quality research. And so the contribution of the book in some ways is not just summarizing research, but bringing a conceptual framework with which to then interpret that evidence and then give you actionable ideas. So every chapter is what I call half science and half engineering, where the first half is synthesizing the evidence and the research and saying, this is what the facts are. This is why we are the way we are. This is what we can do. And the second half is then what exactly are actionable, implementable ideas that can be done at the state government level. Okay, so the next few slides are going to be a little depressing because I'm just going to highlight how severe these problems are. And why do I have these 6 chapters? Because this reflects any effective organization, right? Whether it's public, private, or nonprofit, the key drivers of organizational effectiveness is what are your data and your outcome measurement? What are your targets? What's the org working towards every quarter, right? Personnel, how do you hire, pay, promote, post, which is kind of often the most important part of org effectiveness. How do you spend your money? Are you investing in ineffective areas? What's your revenue model? If you're a global multinational, you need to figure out what's happening in global head office, national head office, and the field office. And that's exactly the same set of issues when you think about federalism and decentralization in kind of a multi-tiered governance system. And then the last, going back to post 1937 on the boundaries of the firm, is you then need to kind of look at the state and the market and what do you do in-house, what do you outsource? And even to use markets effectively, that requires state capacity for both procurement and regulation, which ends up being a key weakness. Okay, so the next just to highlight how severe these issues are. Okay, so here is data and a simple but very depressing picture. Okay, so what is here on the left-hand side is basically this is from an audit study done by Abhijit Singh, and this is the state of Madhya Pradesh that really worked hard to do high-quality student learning assessments, right? So this was considered a national best practice in Niti Aayog in 2015, and it really was an incredibly sincere effort where the government put in effort to make sure every child is kind of learning outcomes are being measured every year and reported. The idea is you then kind of push the system towards improving outcomes, right? Now, the bad news is that the top black line is what you see in the official data, right? And the bottom dotted line is what you get in an independent audit study where researchers go and retest a sample of the same kids on the same question, okay? So in the official data, you see that there is no child scoring below 65% in Hindi. In the independent data, there's no child scoring above 65%, okay? And now, why is this a national tragedy, right? It's a national tragedy because this is partly why we have wasted 20 years as a country, right? Because since 2005, Pratham has been doing household surveys saying that children are not learning, okay? But when you go to the government, even if a joint secretary in private can admit that this is a problem, in public, they can only work with official data. And in the official data, there is no crisis, right? So which means if you kind of deny the existence of the problem, you're not going to be able to craft strategies to address it, right? And you see the same story in nutrition, where even in a relatively high functioning state like Tamil Nadu, the official malnutrition data in the ICDS, severe malnutrition is about 1%. In the independent data, that's about 8%. Okay. Now, why is this such a fundamental issue? Because our entire policy for severe malnutrition says that you need to increase the budget for supplemental feeding from 5 rupees a day to 9 rupees a day if a child is malnourished. But if you're not classifying over 85% of them as malnourished, then you're not going to activate the downstream action. Okay. And so that's kind of why data is foundational to being able to build to be able to build a more effective state. Now, the good news is there's a whole bunch of low-cost tech-enabled solutions that the technical solutions exist, and we can talk in Q&A about some of the reasons to be optimistic that things can be done. Okay, so here's personnel. And again, contrary to what a lot of people think, that the Indian state is actually one of the most understaffed in the world, right? I mean, so the employees per 1,000 people in India is 1/10 of kind of high-functioning Scandinavian welfare states, but it's even about 1/5 of the US that we consider to be a paragon of kind of market economics, okay? But the reason we have so few public employees, the biggest reason is Indian government employees are the most overpaid in the world, okay? And that's kind of, you see that on the right, where this is, again, data from one of my own studies in education, where you see that the average government school teacher salary is about 6 times higher, okay, 6 times higher than what the market salary is, okay? And so this is, again, a fundamental tragedy, because the problem is not just state capacity, right? Because the Econ 101 problem is that we should be paying less and hiring more. Okay, but there's a much deeper set of general equilibrium cost that comes from here, right? And so when we see that there's 200, 300 applicants for every government job, okay, people say that, oh, this is because the private sector is not creating jobs. That's not true. The private sector does create jobs, but the private sector creates jobs at the market wage. So the problem is that the public sector pay is so completely out of whack with productivity that it drives this is now the single biggest driver of youth unemployment in the country, right? So there's a recent study in Tamil Nadu that shows that over 80% of unemployment of educated youth in their 20s is because kids are writing government exam after government exam after government exam, hoping that you will win the government job lottery, okay? Because then you're set for life. And the other downstream consequences of that is that shapes the entire education system. So why do we produce millions of graduates who have degrees but no skills? And that's because the most lucrative employer in the economy only cares about degrees and not skills, right? So students will routinely drop out of skilling programs because it's hard work relative to kind of going back and studying for the government exam. Okay, so I have PhD students now working on actually quantifying what the misallocation cost of this is. But I think this is one of the single biggest elephants in the room, and this has now become so problematic that you can't do even recruitment. Like Bihar and Jharkhand have had to cancel rounds and rounds of recruitment because the stakes are so high that even with like election commission level security, it becomes impossible to stop the paper leaks because the stakes are too high. Okay, so fixing, and this basically reflects the political economy over time, like I said, that the insiders and the unions are so much stronger than the outsiders that every time there is a budget increase or a pay commission, most of your fiscal space goes into these unconditional pay increases. And that has all these downstream consequences of weakening state capacity because you're not hiring enough, but also increasing the distortion between the public and the private sector labor markets. And we can talk more about that. Okay. Here's a simple, very, very simple picture, but it's this powerful conceptual framework that can unify almost every idea in the book, right? And the simple idea is, when we look at effectiveness of public spending, how should you think about quality of expenditure? Now, there is a standard economics ROI way of thinking about the impact and efficiency, right? But we also care about equity and we care about inclusion. And so you could think about every policy and look at its kind of economic and incidence and impacts and put them in this 2x2 quadrant of equity and efficiency, right? Now, a lot of our public discourse focuses on region 2 versus region 4, and reasonable people can disagree on whether you want to prioritize. So, a policy like moving to a uniform GST would be in region 2 because that improves the efficiency of the tax system, but is potentially regressive, okay? Something like the PDS could be sitting in region 4 because it helps food security of the poor, but at the cost of inefficiency in the food economy, okay? But what I want to highlight is that we spend lakhs of crores, right, on items that are in region 3, right? And that means we're spending money on things that are bad for both equity and efficiency. And that means we don't have the fiscal space to kind of invest in region 1 ideas. Okay, so that example of the ICDS study I gave you, we estimate that the ROI in putting that extra worker is 2000%. Okay, so you're talking about like a 20x ROI, and that will also promote equity because it's primarily used by the poor. Okay, whereas in contrast, we spend so much money on unconditional pay increases. That's kind of sitting in region 3. If you look at agriculture or rural development, right, NREGA, that Econometrica paper again shows, was incredibly effective for both equity and efficiency because it's counteracting monopsony power and boosting kind of local aggregate demand multipliers. But where do we spend like literally tens of thousands of crores? It goes to free electricity for farmers, which is bad for equity because the top 5% of landowners get about 50% of the subsidy. It's bad for efficiency in terms of distorting the groundwater table, as well as cropping patterns, not to mention crop burning and pollution. So these are just like these stark examples, right? When you look at the budget, and if you take your budget and just put it in these quadrants, that will allow you to make the fiscal space for the things that we need to be doing in region 1 by kind of getting public attention to focus on the items that are in region 3 and build a broad-based consensus across both the left and the right that we need to be doing less of this. Okay, so and then, let me just give you this picture on federalism, again, coming from Devesh's work.
Just a quick
A time check?
No, yeah, if you can.
5 minutes. Yeah, because I think I started at 1:10, right? Like, so I'll just go, 1:10 for me. So I'll just try to wrap up in 5 minutes, okay? So decentralization, India is the most over-centralized country in the world, okay? And this has huge kind of cascade effects. And frankly, the bigger problem is not center to state, but state to local. Okay, but this is a cross-cutting issue, right? So, but then I promised you I'm going to be optimistic. Now, okay, the case for optimism is precisely because there is, the levels are so low that there is a lot of low-hanging fruit. Okay, so what I'm going to do in my last 5 minutes is that's why this is really 2 books, right? Because the goal is to accelerate development. But my core argument is that you cannot accelerate development without building an effective state, because that is the binding constraint to delivering better outcomes on all of these kind of human development areas that we care about. Okay, so what I'm going to do in the next 5 minutes is just, if you think about the last 50 years, the big debate in development has been kind of the growth versus development debate, or the Bhagwati Sen debate, and where the growth view is saying you get 2% higher growth for 20 years, everything else will take care of itself. The development view is that, the point of development is not income, but human development, and therefore you need to focus more on the social sector, right? Now, my point of departure in this debate is saying this debate we've gone for 50 years. Okay, now at one level they're both right, because clearly more growth helps human development, more human development helps growth. So what are we arguing about? And it really becomes an ideological debate where the center right wants more capex and the center left wants more social sector, right? But what I'm arguing here is this is fundamentally a zero-sum debate about budget allocation, whereas the way you can do more of everything is by focusing on the effectiveness of the state, and that's what's going to allow you to accelerate development, right? Now, so here is then the case for optimism. So this is perhaps the most important achievement in human development in the second half of the 20th century, or the 20th century itself, right? And this is the shifting of the Preston curve that was highlighted by Sam Preston in 75 and then popularized by Angus Deaton. And the main point is that if you look at human progress over time and say life expectancy, that countries over time, that curve shifts upwards, right? So what that means is even poor countries today can achieve better outcomes than rich countries did, several years ago. And the key driver of that is better technologies. Okay. So the question is, what do today's developing countries have that today's rich countries did not have at the same level of historic per capita income that can accelerate human development? And what I'm going to argue is that we have much, much better data and evidence on the quality of expenditure, right? So what's happened in the last 20 years is the explosion of micro data sets, better empirical methods and computing power has allowed us to identify much, much better about what effects different programs and policies are having. And so the free lunch here is that there's enormous opportunities to improve spending quality, because many very, very expensive policies and programs have no impact, and other much less expensive interventions have been found to be highly, highly effective, but are not being implemented at scale. Okay, and that highlights then the importance of research and evidence, because there's no market test. So I'm going to, I'll just take 30 seconds on this, right? Because I think this is such a powerful picture to give you an example of the power of this kind of research, right? So for years, we keep increasing the education budget and we get no impact. And then this picture helps us understand why, okay? So this is from a study of mine in Rajasthan with a sample of about 6,000 kids. And the x-axis is the grade in which the kids are enrolled in. The y-axis is the level of learning, right? Now, if the kids are making progress as per the curriculum, they would be on that 45-degree blue line, okay? In practice, the true level of learning is about half of that, and that's on that red line. So what that means is that the average 8th grade kid in the sample has about a 4th grade level of math understanding. But even more importantly, what the computer-based dynamic testing lets us do is I can pinpoint every kid in the class, and you see now that variation, that in that 8th standard class, you have students at a 2nd standard level of understanding, at a third, at a fourth, at a fifth, all the way up to 8th grade. Okay. And in that variation, the reason you have this is kind of the consequence of the well-intentioned no detention policy, which was trying to prevent dropouts. But as a result, you've now promoted kids to higher grades, even though you got kids in 8th grade at a 2nd grade level. And then it's humanly impossible for a teacher to handle that kind of variation. And so then that helps us understand why the spending is not translating into outcomes. So இப்போ வந்து நான் இதே லெக்சருக்கு நடுவில் வந்து ஒரு வேற பாஷால பேச ஆரம்பிச்சா அங்க இந்திராக்கு புரியும் 4-5 பேருக்கு புரியும். ஆனா வந்து நான் எவ்வளோ மோட்டிவேட்டடா இருந்தாலும் சரி, எவ்வளோ கமிட்டடா இருந்தாலும் சரி, உங்களுக்கு வந்து ஒரு வார்த்தை புரியாது. ஏன்னா நான் வந்து ஒரு வேற பாஷால பேசுற மாதிரி, ஏன்னா லெவல் வந்து கரெக்டா இல்ல. So what did I just do to you is I just gave you 25 seconds in the shoes of a typical kid of a typical classroom in lakhs of schools around India. And that's because it might as well be that the teacher is speaking a different language because the level of instruction of the textbook is so far above where the kids are. And the contrast, therefore, is once you identify this, there are such inexpensive interventions that can have transformative impact. Okay. So to end up my last 2 slides, is if you kind of, because we want to get to Viksit Bharat by 2047, okay? But if you look at, say, stunting and learning outcomes, if you just look at the rate at which we have progressed in converting income into outcomes over the last 15 to 20 years, and if you just project that same elasticity forward at a growth rate of 6% per capita, okay? So this is already reasonably optimistic. But if you go at 6% for the next 25 years, in 2047 or 22 years, you will still have 25% stunting, okay? We are at 35% today. China's at 8%, okay? So even if you go at 6%, you get there. Now, even if you get growth up to 8% GDP, which is outstanding, that would be stupendous, right? The stunting reduction is only 22%, goes only down to 22, and that's because the translation of the spending to outcomes has been so weak, okay? But if you can double the effectiveness of expenditure going forward, and remember, many of the ideas in the book will give you a 10x ROI, okay? Not just double. So, but if you can double going forward, then even at 6%, you bend that curve down from 25 to 17. And when you do that, you're increasing the tailwinds to growth because you're boosting human development and increases the chances that you'll do 8%, and that gets you down to 13. Okay. Same with education. But if you go at the current rate, you will still have in 2047, 16% of kids in rural India completing class 5 without being able to read at a class 2 level. Okay. So it's not that progress is not happening. Progress is happening. But the question is, how do you accelerate this? And that acceleration is not going to happen without improving the translation of expenditure into outcomes. And this is why doubling that effectiveness is going to be way, way more important than even getting to 8% growth. Okay. So yeah, so that's it. I'm done. So my last slide, just to kind of give you the roadmap of the entire book. So why am I picking these 6 sectors of education, health, police, courts? Because here you don't, in these 6 sectors, you don't have to choose between Bhagwati and Sen, right? Because every one of these sectors is intrinsically important for kind of a good quality life, which is the Senian view. But every one of them is also instrumentally important for accelerating growth, right? So my broader goal with this book is to not just kind of write a technical book, but given how polarized discourse tends to be in many parts of the world, is to identify an agenda that can get a broad kind of consensus. Because if you're on the center left and care about equity and justice, there is no better way to deliver at scale than building a more effective state. If you're on the center right and you care more about growth and national power and national effectiveness, there is again no more effective way than improving kind of effectiveness of the government and laying the foundations for long-term growth. Okay, so let me stop there and look forward to the questions.
Thank you so much, Karthik. That was
Sorry, I can't hear you, Indra.
if we just accelerated our growth at the pace at which you spoke, wow, we would be in a very good place. Here's Shekhar.
Thank you, Indira, and thank you, Ajay and George Washington University for inviting me to comment on Karthik's work, and I'm delighted to be doing so. It is common knowledge among Karthik's close friends that it's suicidal to follow him on stage. His level of energy is impossible to match, especially when in 25 minutes he has covered an 812-page volume, which he has just done. By the way, Karthik, you know that you have beaten the record on the largest contemporary single volume book on the Indian economy. Ashok Lahiri had a book called India's Search for Glory, and that was only 712 pages. So at 812, you really outranked him. But to be fair and not to discourage anyone, it's only 600 pages of text, and the rest is just fantastic references and fantastic notes. And in case you still need some celestial nudges for reading this book, look closely at the cover and the picture of the Vidhan Sabha in Bangalore. And under its awning, Karthik has a secret message that if you can actually read, you will certainly be inspired to read the book. Let me place this work in the context of the 1991 reforms, and I wish Shruti was here because she'd be delighted to hear this. All of us know that in 1991, the team deregulated product markets and we liberalized. Many know and many have commented on the fact that we couldn't get to the factors of production for land and labor because of all the coalition politics and the corruption scandals that followed thereafter. But what is really not commented on and what Karthik's work really brings right in front of us is the fact that there was very little attention placed on the capability of government to actually manage this much more liberal environment. And it's that capability, and I agree with Karthik, that has fundamentally held back the kind of pace of growth and development that we could have seen. Now, I'm not going to do a review of the book because clearly it's been much acclaimed and he's been prodigious on book launches and book talks. But what I will do is just make 3 points about where I think this work can go further and really add to and add to the pace of his subtitle of the book, which is a state-led roadmap for effective governance. First, as a logical step on this roadmap, it would be really worth Karthik and his team to examine variations in state performance. And as some of us know, we have upper middle income states in the south and really low middle income states in the north, maybe even low income states in the north. So we are not a continent. We are a continent. This is not just one set of states. So the variation in these states will really yield rich dividends. And there's a lot of evidence that this works. In my own work at NCAR, we did a land records index, how well states put out their land records. And in doing that, we fundamentally increased the interest of the lagging states in learning from the leading states. Indira Iyer and I, we did a state investment potential index that did the same thing. So there's a lot of mileage in looking at cross-country, across-state experiences. Now, Karthik does mention this in a segment that says, why should chief ministers of states look at this issue? But it is a complex problem. It obviously requires a lot of work. I suspect that Karthik's next volume should be on looking at state-to-state variation and what we can learn from this. And in doing so, I would hope that, Karthik, you would look at both successes and failures. You mentioned our common colleague, Lant, and in his book on building state capability, what he does with his co-authors is to look at why often building state capacity looks like it's being done, but actually it is camouflaging a lot behind it, either because of bad data that Karthik referred to, or what Lant has referred to as isomorphic mimicry, where an organization is looking good, but behind the scenes is really not performing well at all. And worse still, what Lant calls successful failures. So, for example, if a state after decades has a corrupt police force, then clearly it's been successful in persisting to remain corrupt, even though I'm sure lots of effort have gone into trying to get rid of that corruption. So evidence-based studies of successful and failed attempts to build the capability of the state, perhaps even with some anonymization, and case studies of this would really push the agenda forward and create the incentives for the lagging states to be looking at what's going on in the leading ones. This leads to my second point, which is about SEGIS, the Center for Effective Governance of Indian States, that Karthik and my friend Ashish Dhawan formed in 2019, just as actually this book was being written. So both took birth at the same time. I hope, Karthik, that you will bring in the experiences of SEGIS in working with this framework that you've developed, working with the evidence that you've developed, to be able to take this dialogue forward. The 4 goals of SEGIS, quite understandably, are to be able to measure development outcomes effectively, to be able to strategically allocate resources to them, to then manage personnel in ways in which they can deliver using those resources, and for the state in the end to be able to relate to the market and be able to regulate it in wise and effective ways. So I think this is a tremendous agenda for SEGIS. You've already got several states lined up. Interestingly, the major states are Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, and Telangana, all southern states, which goes to this question I raised about the variation in states. I know that Delhi and Niti Aayog are also working with SEGIS, but clearly you can see the interest in the southern states to really move this agenda forward. And that goes to that variation point I made. So that was my second point. And then the third point that I wanted to make really is a bit of a personal journey that I've had the privilege of having with Karthik. He has mentioned to me that his decision to do professionally what he decided to do came out of a visit and a series of visits that he did with Marty Feldstein when he was a PhD student of Marty's to the Neemrana conference that some of you may be familiar with, where he heard Esther Duflo and Abhijit Banerjee and Michael Kramer talk about education, which then led him to work, of course, on education and why learning outcomes weren't improving. Thereafter, in 2003, he did a marvelous study with others on absenteeism amongst teachers and healthcare providers globally. This was for the World Development Report of 2004 on service delivery, which I was privileged also to be an author. And more recently, in 2011, when I arrived at NCER, one of the first things I did was to invite Karthik to talk about primary education in India, which then led to his writing a paper for the India Policy Forum Journal of NCER, followed then in 2015 by another on public sector hiring, and then again, 2 more papers on income transfers and biometric verification. So this is a tremendous journey that Karthik has taken. I've been privileged to be part of it. And I hope very much that this journey shows that a empirically grounded, policy-focused, serious researcher working on India can make tenure and indeed can make a chair professorship at a leading US university. I know a concern that Karthik had in the early days when he was doing this, but it just shows that this is a very productive journey. And for those of us who are interested in India's future, clearly a path to follow. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Shekhar. Can I just take a few minutes to just offer a couple of quick responses and then open it to the audience?
Yeah, yes. You have
Yeah.
yeah, we have Karthik from the audience. It's 4:47.
Yeah,
So-
let me respond to Shekhar for 2 minutes, okay? And then And because what I did was strategically, I had one last slide, which I did not present, hoping it would come up in Q&A. And Shekhar, I promise we did not coordinate this at all. Okay. But Shekhar teed it up very nicely. So, on Shekhar's 3 points on the third one, let me just say thank you. And, it's just, yeah, it's a journey that's been enabled by many people, in fact, even in that room. And I hope to kind of, do my bit to contribute both to policy and research. So I think the two substantive points, Shekhar, that you raised, both completely well taken. And I think, so the reason for founding CGIS is, if you notice that the last slide had these 2 chapters of making it happen. So it would be very ironic to kind of say that the challenge is state capacity and then expect somehow that writing a book will magically make things happen, right? So, and this itself reflects my policy journey, partly beginning with Shekhar's invitation and then working with Montek in the Planning Commission and then with Arvind in Niti Aayog. And so, I've been completely non-partisan in kind of engagement with governments, both in state and center. And you just realize that the common constraint in everything is that most of our discourse is on policy and not how will it happen, right? So the idea that we need to bring state capacity to the core of the development agenda is something that had started germinating as early as 2018. And then the 2 things that happened in parallel, one was kind of the book, which was trying to set an intellectual roadmap. But the second is to actually roll up our sleeves and saying, listen, it's not enough, because building state capacity is not something that happens kind of with, oh, here is a script and you go do it, right? It is an iterative journey where we will learn, we will fail. So the way to think about kind of the book in terms of the policy ideas is, it's what I call strong views weakly held, right? So the views are strong enough to say, if somebody would ask me, what should we do? We have a set of places to begin. But then they're weakly held in the sense that there is no dogma that it will work in the way that it has been laid out, that you have to be open to course correction when theory meets reality, right? And so so the principles of CGIS's work, is, the intellectual roadmap comes from the book, but we work with multiple state governments and, it's 5-year MOUs anchored in the state finance department, because the core theme really is improving the quality of expenditure, and finance is the constituency within government that cares the most about that. We have small teams provided at no cost to the government, but we get commitments to both, seconded staff. So that's the other way in which this is not just a consulting operation coming and making some pretty PowerPoints, right? The best way you build state capacity is not by doing training sessions, but by actually building capacity of people to do complex things, right? So by creating these teams that have both external experts and internal seconded staff sitting in government space, the hope is that many of these things become more sustainable. The high level strategy is the 3x3, because we also have to focus. So it's these 3 critical horizontal governance functions. That's chapter 4, 5, 6 on data, personnel, and public finance. And then 3 key sectors, that's education, health, and early childhood, both because I think these are the sectors that matter the most for long term, but also tend to get neglected the most because the short term payoff is low. And it's also where we have the most high quality research. So the first 5 years of this journey has been much more experimental with kind of a modular menu of solution offerings. But in the next phase, there has been a sharp increase in demand because, and so Shekhar, the reason we started in Telangana and Tamil Nadu is actually not just because it's a South, but frankly, the most important ingredient in this journey was trust on the counterpart side. And because I have worked in Unified Andhra since 2004, the number of officials there who kind of know that this will be deep, high quality work and therefore were willing to kind of let us start up in on a new journey. So that was the key reason for Telangana. And Tamil Nadu, Vijay, who's the CEO of CGIS, is a former Tamil Nadu cadre IAS officer, right? So I think it just reflects the fact that even testing this out requires trust on the counterpart side. But now that I think the templates are there and a lot of good work has happened, there is an explosion in demand across states. So we'll most likely, we just signed Chhattisgarh earlier this year, when UP is almost certainly happening. So
Actually,
that's going
we
to
have
be
5
that's going to
minutes.
be a test. So I'm done there and look forward to further discussions.
Thank you so much. This has been extremely enriching. It's actually giving a completely different point of view that, state capacity investment and actually making the pie more efficient, filling in the blanks and all the but more interestingly, Karthik actually talks about how we do it. So that's very interesting. We'll take some quick questions. We have questions for you for half an hour, but we will just take a few here.
I worked on Nigeria for many years, and one
I'm
of
sorry, please can you introduce yourself because I can't see you.
I'm Poonam Gupta. I am World Bank retiree, and I wanted to tell you that I worked in the World Bank on Nigeria for many years, and they couldn't get a grasp on these state level reforms that my experts were talking about. One of the things we discovered was that the New York State had a dashboard, results dashboard, that they use that to monitor different counties, health, education, all that. They have all the metrics which are all publicly available. And each county could see where they were on the metrics that you mentioned, law and order, health, education, so on and so forth. And they use that to monitor how the counties are doing and for the states to intervene to improve capacity. So I'm just thinking, rather than go through this big fat book, couldn't we couldn't we find a way to simplify it by saying, guys, here's the dashboard. Now we'll tell you, we can help you to improve capacity.
Thank you, Poonam. That was very good observation. If you keep just your questions short so that Karthik can rapid fire after that. Yours, yeah.
Thank you. I'm Dilip Ratha from the World Bank Group. I'm in MIGA now. I have a quick question about volatility of state level GDPs. You know, it's a perpetual thing. It doesn't happen only once a year or something like that. It is, you know, Odisha, for example, is 3 times more volatile growth rate than India's average GDP growth. Should we worry about it? Because it has profound consequences. Within a country, different regions should have different volatility, a different economic path. But this kind of volatility, which is unpredictable, should we worry about it?
Thank you so much, Dilip. I'm going to collect a few more, 3 more questions for you before you answer in 2 minutes. Karthik.
Hi, I'm Vivek Srivastava. I'm an IAS and World Bank retiree. So I mean, this was an excellent presentation. Thank you very much. How would you answer the question? You know, everybody recognizes this bad equilibrium, and you fleshed it out with a lot of evidence. Why does this bad equilibrium persist? And what would it take to perturb this equilibrium? And in that context, I mean, you've suggested the CGIS model. I'm sure you'll find some wonderful people in some states who will do good things. But arguably, there's a structural issue. The system in India of government has pretty much remained unchanged since the colonial days, where it was created for maintaining law and order and extracting revenue. And I think Shekhar alluded to this. There was a point when a whole development agenda was then piled on to the same structure. And arguably, this structure is not designed to cope with this. And that's why it does well on mission mode, as you, I think, mentioned, and not on delivery mode.
Thank you so much. I'm going to take just 2 more questions, one from a student here. So I'll add my question to Vivek's question. What are the incentive compatibility mode for states, right? What are the incentive for them to be in the grand growth story? Here's, please introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Akhil. I'm a master's student at GW in economics. My question is that since you've worked with Andhra Pradesh government after the partition of the state, Mr. Naidu has attracted a lot of investment from Singapore and other countries. But there is a lot of misappropriation of those funds after he left power. So how does an economist or a policymaker look at misappropriations and doesn't let the change of government affect the investment that comes into a state?
And I'm going to just take the last question because I'm only going to give you 2 minutes and we are at 57. So one last question. Well, 2 last questions, but each is for 15 seconds. We have to match Karthik.
JP Hogan, since I use on Twitter the hashtag Constitution, I've learned India is always changing their constitution. How is that helping or hurting?
Good question. And one more.
Hi, my name is Nida.
very quick question. What are the biggest obstacles to increasing state capacity? Is it red tapeism? Is it corruption? Is it centralization of power? All of the above? And where do you see the biggest opportunity?
Any more?
Indra, like 2 minutes, right? So let me just.
Last, I'm giving because Karthik is rapid fire, right? So he's okay.
I want your opinion on two items. I feel your 752-page or whatever book could be reduced down to India's biggest problems are rule of law and over-centralized taxation. Would you agree with that?
Thank you very much, Karthik. 1 minute, 43 seconds.
Yeah,
to
so
answer
just,
each
yeah, so I'll
question.
say a couple of things. I think, I can't address everything. So multiple people have mentioned, why a big book? And everybody says this, right? Why couldn't you have simplified this further? So, and I have an extensive note on this in the preface, right? See, the way to think about this is it's 600 pages, but to write 600 pages, I have read 60,000 pages, right? So this is already a 1% synthesis. And I think the way to read the book is not kind of 600 pages together, but think about each chapter as a mini book, right? So each chapter is 30, 35 pages, and it's easily digestible, right? So the way to read the book is just read the intro, and then it's kind of a choose your adventure because the chapters are reasonably self-contained. Okay. And I think I'm also I cite Einstein in the preface, right? That says I'm trying to follow Einstein's maxim that you should try to simplify as much as possible, but no further. Okay. So the book is an enormous effort at simplifying, actually. Like, if you read it, you'll see how easy the writing is. But at some point, we also need to kind of have the discipline to stop looking for quick fixes because, high income countries built effective states over 100 and 150 years. And what I say in the end is that this is a 25-year roadmap, right? I mean, there is no silver bullet because the nature of systems is everything interacts with everything else. Okay. And that's what makes this so hard. So, let me take, I think, that question, I think, from Vivek, right?
Karthik,
And
we are
Indira.
five.
Yeah, sorry. We started 3 minutes late. Let me just take 1 minute. Okay. So what Indira and Vivek said, I think, is the most important question. Okay. Which is the book provides a set of technocratic ideas, but how do you create the political incentives to act on that? Okay. And the reason to be optimistic is that if you look at the data on state level elections, right, it is very clear that performing states in terms of higher growth and better governance are more likely to get re-elected. Okay. So there is an old politics of identity, polarization, caste, region, language, religion, and there is a new politics of service delivery and governance. I'm not saying the old politics is over, but the old politics only gets you 15 to 20% of the vote. To get that next 20%, you need to deliver. Okay, which means that every chief minister and finance minister I've met in the past year has kind of given me over an hour one-on-one to look for ideas. So I think people are genuinely looking for solutions, and we all need to kind of contribute to kind of getting us there. So let me stop there.
Actually, Karthik, I wish we really had more time. Actually, to your many solutions, and you're actually a different way of thinking about things, and the fantastic work that you've done over the last 20 years. It has really been commendable, and thank you so much for taking the time and joining us here. Thank you, Shekhar. And Ajay.
And thank you, Shekhar. Yeah, thank you,
Thank you.
Shekhar. Thank you, Indira. And again, for everyone, the reason I've written the book is it seems big, but it's a way of distilling 20 years of learning. So yeah, you should just
I
go
could
read
not
it.
agree more. It's a must read, definitely. Thank you.
Thanks, Indira. Thanks, Ajay. Thanks, Shekhar.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Indra, you had the most difficult job today, I think, but you handled it very well. And actually, you think of it as an encyclopedia on state reform. And as he rightly said, you can go to different chapters and you can pick and choose. I mean, it's not a book to be read like at one go from page to page, but I've certainly learned a lot from it.